I woke up that morning like any other. Quietly, the smell of coffee already drifting from the kitchen. I pulled on some sweatpants, shuffled my feet to the bathroom, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. It had become routine. Everything had. Sarah was at the table when I walked into the kitchen, her eyes fixed on her phone. The usual breakfast, the same cereal, same bowl. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. No, good morning, no, how'd you sleep? Just silence, punctuated only by the clink of cereal on porcelain, and the occasional flick of her finger swiping across her phone screen. "Did you get the bills?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah," I muttered. "I'll pay them tonight." I grabbed a cup, poured some coffee, and sat down. It wasn't even uncomfortable anymore. It was like we were living parallel lives in the same house, but we barely touched anymore. "I think I'm gonna run to the store later," she said, her voice flat. "Okay." I wasn't sure if it was a question or just an observation, but I responded anyway. We'd fallen into a pattern where every conversation felt like a transaction, what we needed to get done, where we needed to be, no room for anything else. She looked up at me, her eyes briefly meeting mine. "You know," she said, her tone turning cold, "you'd never find someone better than me." I blinked, confused. It took me a second to process what she'd said. "What?" She didn't repeat herself, just shrugged, tapping the phone screen again, like she hadn't just delivered a quiet bomb into the conversation. "Forget it," she added, dismissive. "I'm just saying." I sat there, trying to piece it together. Was she serious? Was she joking? I couldn't tell. And I didn't like it. It felt off. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but instead, I just sat back, staring at the dregs of my coffee. The cracks in our marriage had always been there, slow, almost imperceptible. But that comment, that moment, felt like the first time I'd really noticed them. She got up, moving around the kitchen like I wasn't there, and I stayed in my seat, staring at the table, trying to make sense of whatever that was. The silence between us felt heavier than usual, but it wasn't new. That had been our reality for the past few years. A marriage that felt more like two people going through the motions than anything that resembled love. I thought about her words later, but in the moment, I just let them linger in the air. I didn't know what to do with them, but I'd started to realize that maybe I hadn't been paying attention to something I should have been. Maybe the distance between us wasn't just a matter of routine. Maybe it was more. I couldn't shake her words. "You'd never find someone better than me." That line kept replaying in my head over and over. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she said them, so casual, so cold. Like she wasn't even trying. I wasn't angry at her yet. I was confused more than anything. I didn't bring it up again. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought it'd blow over, or maybe I was afraid of what it meant. But instead of confronting her, I started paying more attention to the way she acted. And the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just that comment. It was everything. She'd been distant for a while now, but I hadn't really noticed. Or maybe I didn't want to. I was still in my routine, being the dependable husband, taking care of the house and the bills, doing the things I thought would make her notice me. But she never seemed to care. I started to remember things, little things, like when I'd come home from work, tired but still trying to be present, asking her about her day, and getting nothing in return. Just a grunt, or worse, a change of subject. Or that time I'd planned a weekend getaway, a nice hotel, a couple's massage, and she'd barely looked up from her phone, too busy to even pretend she was interested. I'd asked her what was wrong, and she'd snap back with some half-assed excuse about being too busy or tired. That was the story of the last few years, me trying to keep the connection alive, and her pulling away a little more each time. It wasn't like she was openly hostile. It wasn't like we fought. But she never noticed when I was upset, never asked if I was okay. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd change the subject or shut down. I thought about the last time I had really tried to talk to her about us. It was a year ago, maybe more. I was sitting on the couch watching some dumb reality show she had on. I turned to her, trying to break through the silence. "Do you think we're okay?" I'd asked, and she just shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." And then back to the TV. That was it. No follow-up, no questions. I didn't want to admit it, but it had started to sink in. She didn't care. Not about me, not about us. She was fine with the routine, the comfortable nothingness. Maybe that's all she wanted, but I didn't. I wanted something more. I wanted a connection. I wanted to be seen. The worst part? I realized that I'd been settling. I'd been sitting back, waiting for her to notice, for her to change, and she hadn't. She didn't even seem to realize I was becoming a stranger to her. It hurt, but the truth was becoming clearer. She hadn't been emotionally present for a long time, and the more I thought about it, the more I saw it wasn't a recent shift. It had been gradual, maybe even since we moved into this house, maybe even before that, but I hadn't wanted to see it. I'd buried my head in the sand, telling myself that things were fine, that if I just kept doing what I was supposed to do, being the reliable, supportive guy, everything would work out. But nothing was working. And now that I saw it, really saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't like she was an awful person, but she wasn't the person I'd married. And it stung more than I wanted to admit that I might not even be the person she married anymore. I didn't tell her. Of course I didn't. There was no reason to. She wouldn't care. And besides, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to drag this out. I wasn't going to beg for a conversation that she wouldn't even bother to have. If she wasn't going to notice me before, I was damn sure she wouldn't notice me now. I started moving quietly in the background. At first, it was small things, opening a separate bank account. I didn't trust the joint account anymore. It was always her who controlled it, who monitored it, who made sure everything was in the green, as she liked to say. I never saw any of it, not the numbers, not the truth. But I needed something for myself. So I went to the bank and opened a new account under my name. Just a small one, nothing flashy. I moved a little money over at a time, just enough to be safe, just enough to be prepared. I canceled the joint credit cards too. She'd never notice. She barely noticed me anymore. I kept one of the cards active, the one for her. She could keep using it for whatever she needed. It didn't matter. It wasn't about the money, it was about getting out. It was about having something left for me when the time came. Then came the lawyer. I'd been researching, reading, making sure I knew what I was getting into. The process of leaving wasn't simple. It was a damn mess of paperwork and waiting periods, but I could handle it. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer. It was a strange feeling, sitting in that office. I hadn't expected the conversation to feel so cold. The lawyer was polite, professional, and efficient. It was business, pure and simple. She talked to me about assets, custody, alimony, the technical stuff. I nodded through it all, taking notes. At the end of the meeting, she asked if I was sure. I said yes, but the truth, I wasn't sure about much anymore. All I knew was that I had to leave. I couldn't keep pretending this was okay. I also started looking for a place. Nothing too big or fancy. Just enough space to breathe. A small apartment. Something comfortable. I didn't need much. I just wanted a place where I could be alone. I wanted the freedom to make my own choices, without worrying if she'd care or if she'd even notice. I drove around, checked listings online, found a few places that seemed all right. One had a small kitchen, hardwood floors, and a nice view of the city skyline. It was perfect. Nothing extravagant, just enough for me to start over. I handled everything quietly. I didn't let on to anyone. I kept up appearances at home, acting like everything was normal. Nothing had changed. I'd cook dinner, help clean up. I'd ask about her day, even though I knew I wasn't getting anything back. If anything, she seemed even more distant. Maybe she could tell something was off. Maybe she couldn't. I didn't care anymore. I kept it up, being the guy who showed up, did what he was supposed to, and didn't cause any waves. The silence between us grew heavier, but I was okay with it now. It was just a matter of time. I had a plan. I had a way out. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to realize how broken we were. I had to go. I'd never really considered what it would feel like to leave, the weight of it, the finality. But I was ready. It wasn't about revenge or spite or trying to get back at her for anything. It was about taking control, taking back what had been lost. It was about saving whatever dignity I had left. As I drove to the apartment complex I had my eye on, the thought of Sarah didn't even cross my mind. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was what came next. How I'd rebuild myself. How I'd stop being the guy who had been drifting for years. I had a life to reclaim. I started going to the gym. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about showing Sarah that I could still be attractive or fit. I didn't care what she thought anymore. I started going for me. I wanted to feel like I had control over something, anything. I wanted to feel strong, physically and mentally. I didn't jump into it right away, though. At first, I just walked around the track. Then I did some light weights. I didn't push myself too hard, just enough to get used to the rhythm. And over time, I felt the weight of everything I'd been ignoring for so long start to lift, even if just a little. There was something about pushing myself physically that made me feel more grounded, more in charge of my own life. It felt good to sweat, to feel my heart racing, to be reminded that I had something to give, that I was still capable of doing something just for myself. It wasn't just the gym. I started dressing differently too. I'd stand in front of the mirror some mornings, pulling on shirts that actually fit instead of the old, loose ones I'd been hiding behind. I threw out the worn-out stuff, the clothes I'd just settled for because they were easy. I bought some new jeans, a couple of fitted shirts that showed off my shoulders a bit more. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't even thinking about Sarah anymore. I just wanted to look in the mirror and feel good about the guy staring back at me. It was strange at first to be doing things for myself. I hadn't felt like I was allowed to in years. I realized how much I'd let myself go, in a way, how I'd let everything fall into place without ever questioning it. But now, I was actively changing the way I moved through the world. I also started reconnecting with old friends, the ones Sarah didn't like, guys I used to hang out with before everything got wrapped up in her and our life together. She'd always been subtle about it, but I knew she resented them, the way they reminded her that I had a life before her, before this house, before everything that had become us. So I'd slowly push them away, telling myself I was just being responsible, just focusing on the marriage, on our life together. But now, I didn't care anymore. I called Mark, then Jeff, then a few others. We went out for drinks, watched games, talked about the stupid things we used to do. It felt good, like I was getting a piece of myself back. There were parts of me I'd lost along the way, things I had forgotten I even enjoyed. Sarah started noticing the changes, of course. She wasn't blind. I'd catch her glancing at me when I'd come downstairs in a new shirt, or when I'd walk in from the gym. I could tell she was puzzled, even a little annoyed. "Midlife crisis?" she asked one morning, glancing up from her coffee. It wasn't a question, not really. More like a comment that I was supposed to laugh off. I just shrugged. "Could be. You look like you're trying too hard," she added, her tone dismissive. I didn't bite. I didn't care what she thought anymore. "Yeah, maybe," I said, brushing past her. "You think so?" She didn't answer. The more I changed, the more I realized how little she was involved in any of it. She didn't care. She didn't even see me anymore. She saw whatever version of me she'd decided was stuck in her mind. The husband who did his part, who didn't complain, who didn't rock the boat. But she couldn't see that I was becoming someone else. Someone who didn't need her to define him. It didn't matter to her. It wasn't that she was hostile or rude, not exactly. She just didn't care enough to engage. And I was starting to think that was the point. She was still living in the same quiet bubble we'd been in for years, expecting everything to stay the same. But I was already out of it, and she hadn't even noticed. It felt good to reclaim parts of myself, to be someone I'd forgotten about. But I kept my plans hidden. I didn't tell anyone what I was really doing. The gym, the clothes, the reconnecting with old friends. It was all just a byproduct of something much bigger, something I wasn't ready to reveal. Not yet. But it was getting easier. Little by little, I was becoming the man I used to be. The one who didn't apologize for living. The one who remembered he had a right to take up space. It wasn't about Sarah anymore. It wasn't about her noticing or caring. It was about me finally showing up for myself. It was a Wednesday night, the kind where nothing ever happened. Sarah and I were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the TV on, but neither of us really watching. I'd been doing my own thing lately, working out, spending more time out of the house, making sure I kept busy, and tonight was no different. I was scrolling through my phone, and she was fiddling with a magazine, turning the pages slowly, like she was trying to figure out how to start a conversation. Then, out of nowhere, she placed her hand on my arm. It was a gentle touch at first, like she was trying to connect with me. I looked up from my phone, and she was watching me, her eyes soft. The kind of look that used to make me lean in, used to make me believe she actually cared. "Hey," she said, her voice lighter than usual. I didn't mean what I said the other day. It was a joke. You know that, right?" I didn't respond right away. I felt the weight of her hand on my arm, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. It was like she'd realized finally that something was wrong between us, and now she was trying to fix it with some half-hearted apology. I wanted to brush her off, wanted to say something that would make it clear how much I didn't believe her, but I didn't. Instead, I just stared at her, feeling the coldness of the moment seep in. This wasn't a conversation about us. This was her trying to regain control of a situation she didn't understand. "You're serious?" I asked, my tone flat. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. Her hand stayed on my arm, but I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I didn't even acknowledge the touch as anything more than what it was, an attempt to patch things over, a half-assed effort to make everything feel normal again. She was hoping that apology would erase the space that had grown between us, the distance she hadn't bothered to notice until now. "I'm serious," she said, but there was something defensive in her voice. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. You know that." I shook my head, slowly, without breaking eye contact. "No, you weren't trying to hurt me, but you did." She pulled her hand back, the silence stretching between us. She hadn't expected that. I could see it in her face, the surprise, maybe even the confusion. She wasn't used to me standing my ground like this, not after all this time of being passive, of letting her walk all over me. "I didn't mean it like that," she repeated, but the words sounded hollow. She was trying to explain, to justify. But she wasn't listening to what I really needed. She was just trying to put the pieces back together to preserve the image of our marriage. "I don't care how you meant it," I said, my voice still calm. "What matters is that you said it, and I've been ignoring things like that for too long." She looked away then, probably more out of frustration than shame. She didn't want to face the reality of what I was saying. The truth of it was that her dismissiveness, the way she'd been treating me for so long, wasn't something that could be undone with an apology. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a touch or a soft word. I wasn't falling back into old patterns. I wasn't going to make excuses for her behavior anymore. I had spent years doing that, letting things slide, convincing myself it was fine, convincing myself she was just busy or tired or whatever excuse fit. But I wasn't going to do it anymore, not now, not when I was finally seeing things for what they were. "Why didn't you ever ask me how I felt?" I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Why didn't you care to listen? You just shut me out." Her eyes flickered, and for the first time in a long while, she looked uncomfortable. She didn't have an answer. She never did. I stood up then, not wanting to be in this moment with her anymore. "I don't need your apology," I said, my voice steady. "What I need is someone who actually cares, and I haven't had that for a long time." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't care to hear it. I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, her hand still hanging in the air, like she didn't know what to do with it anymore. The weight of that moment didn't hit me until I was alone. But when it did, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had said what needed to be said, and for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix things that weren't worth fixing. I wasn't trying to bend myself back into something I wasn't. I was finally letting go. And she could pretend to care, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't emotionally invested in this relationship anymore. And that realization, it wasn't as painful as I thought it would be. It was freeing. I spent the next few days finalizing everything. I'd already met with the lawyer, so the divorce papers were ready. All that was left was to sign them, make sure the finances were set, and figure out the logistics of leaving. I made sure my savings were secure, checked the new account, and moved the last of the money over. I canceled any remaining joint accounts. The credit cards I'd left active for her use were now the only tie that remained. She'd probably never notice. I didn't want to leave a mess. I didn't want to be the guy who just disappeared without a trace, but I wasn't going to drag it out either. I had nothing left to say to her, and there was no point in going over old ground. I was done. That evening, I came home early. I hadn't cooked for her in a long time. I had forgotten what it felt like, the simple act of making a meal, but tonight I wanted to do something different, something that felt like a gesture. So I made spaghetti, nothing special, but enough to fill the kitchen with the smell of garlic and simmering sauce. I set the table, the plates, the utensils, everything was in place like it used to be, when we still bothered with little things like this. I heard her car pull into the driveway just as the water came to a boil. I'd already set everything out on the table, the way we used to do before everything fell apart. She walked in and looked at the meal I'd prepared, but she didn't say anything, just a glance. A faint raise of her eyebrows. "You okay?" she asked, her voice flat, like it was a genuine question, but not one she really cared to follow up on. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thought I'd make dinner. Hope you're hungry." She shrugged, sat down at the table, and dug into her plate without any enthusiasm. No real thanks, no acknowledgement, just the same indifferent routine. But I didn't mind. I wasn't doing this for her. I ate in silence, the clink of silverware on porcelain louder than I wanted it to be. There was a strange finality in it, a sense that everything was coming to an end, but I didn't rush. I wasn't in a hurry, I wasn't about to make a scene. Halfway through the meal, I slid the divorce papers across the table. She didn't even look at them at first. Just kept eating, like I hadn't just handed her the end of everything. But after a few seconds, she stopped chewing. Her eyes flickered to the papers, and she stared at them like they were a mistake. "What's this?" she asked, her voice low and surprised. "Divorce papers," I said, calm. "I'm done, Sarah." She laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You're kidding, right? This is a joke, right?" I shook my head. "No joke. I've been done for a while." She picked up the papers, flipping through them quickly, as if she were hoping to find something that would make it all go away. But there was nothing to find. It was real. She looked at me, her face pale now, the reality settling in. "You can't be serious," she said, the words coming out in a rush. She put the papers down, her hands shaking slightly. "What the hell is this? After everything? You're just done?" I didn't respond right away. I took a deep breath, not to steady myself, but to make sure I didn't get caught up in her manipulation. I was done with all of it. "You stopped caring a long time ago," I said, my voice level. "So did I. I'm just the first one to admit it." She stared at me, disbelief still painted across her face. "This is about... what? The last few months? You can't be serious." "It's been longer than that," I said. "It's been years, and don't pretend like you didn't know it. You've been checked out for a long time, too. I just couldn't ignore it anymore." Her eyes filled with frustration, but not anger, not like I expected. It was more like a resigned kind of panic. She didn't know how to deal with this, didn't know how to handle me standing up for myself after all these years of keeping quiet. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said quietly, as if trying to appeal to something she thought might still be there. "There's nothing left to fix," I said, pushing my plate aside. "I've tried. We've both tried. But this isn't working. And it hasn't been for a long time." She sat back in her chair, rubbing her face like she was processing it all. Then she stood up, walking toward the kitchen. But I didn't follow her. I just stayed there, calm and composed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to get anything out of her. She turned back, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, that's it? That's it." I didn't need to say anything more. The silence between us filled the space with everything that had been left unsaid for years. It was over, and I was finally okay with it. She didn't leave it there. Of course she didn't. She couldn't just let it go, not when she felt like she was losing control. She started pacing around the kitchen, muttering to herself. I could hear her trying to make sense of what I'd said, like maybe if she said it out loud enough, it would all turn into a bad joke. But I wasn't laughing. "Are you really doing this?" she finally asked, her voice rising. "You're acting like I didn't try, like I didn't care at all. Do you really think I just checked out? You're being way too sensitive about this." I stayed seated at the table, my hands still flat on the surface, calm, like this wasn't the first time she'd tried to manipulate me into feeling guilty. She was good at it, but it didn't work on me anymore. It hadn't worked in a long time. "I'm not being sensitive," I said. "I'm being honest. You stopped caring, Sarah, a long time ago. You just didn't want to admit it." Her face twisted, like she'd been slapped. She wasn't used to hearing that from me. She wasn't used to hearing the truth from me. "How can you say that? You're making it sound like I've just been ignoring you, like I'm the one who did nothing." Her voice cracked, but she quickly covered it up. "I've tried, you know. I've tried to make things work." "Have you?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her, keeping my tone steady. "Because when I tried to talk to you, you shut me down. When I needed you, you were nowhere to be found. When I asked for something more, you gave me nothing." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw the desperation flash in them. "I can't believe you're doing this. You think we can just walk away from everything, after all we've been through?" She started to pace again, her hands gesturing wildly like she was trying to will me into seeing her side of things. "We can fix this. We can fix it if you'd just try harder, if you'd stop being so dramatic for once." She was angry now, but it wasn't the anger I was used to. It was panic. She wasn't in control anymore, and that was something she couldn't handle. "Try harder?" I repeated, my voice soft but firm. I've tried. I've tried more than you ever noticed. But it's not about trying harder. It's about facing the reality that we're not the same people anymore. We've been living in a dead marriage for years. You're the one who checked out, Sarah, and I'm just the one who finally realized it. She stopped pacing. Her eyes locked on me, and for a brief moment, I saw the frustration in them, the kind that only came when she realized she was losing her grip. "You're really going to throw all of this away?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper now, like the last bit of her control was slipping. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to walk out like it meant nothing?" "It meant something," I said. "It meant a lot. But that doesn't mean we can fix it. That doesn't mean we can go back to what we had, because we never really had it. Not anymore." Her hands were trembling now, and for the first time, she looked like she didn't know what to do with herself. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to beg her to stay, to somehow undo what had already been broken. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to play that game anymore. "You think I'm overreacting?" I asked, leaning forward, looking at her straight on. "You think this is something I'm making up? You've been checked out for so long, you don't even know how to face it. And now that I'm done, now that I'm finally seeing things clearly, you want to pretend like we can fix it all with a conversation? You want me to ignore everything I've felt for the past few years, just to make you feel better about yourself?" Her eyes flickered. The realization was there, creeping into her face, and I could tell she was struggling with it. This wasn't just a minor fight, not just a passing disagreement. This was the end. She was losing control, and for once I wasn't giving it back. "You don't get it, do you?" I said quietly. "You don't get how long I've been checked out of this relationship, too. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm just done pretending like we can fix something that was broken a long time ago." Her frustration boiled over. She opened her mouth to say something else, but the words got caught in her throat. She closed her mouth, turned away, and walked toward the living room, her back stiff, her movements tight. She wasn't ready to accept it, not yet. But I was. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I just knew finally that this was the moment where I stopped being the person she'd molded me into. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. And she could try to control me, try to guilt trip me, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. It felt strange, moving into the new apartment. At first, it was just a space. Empty walls, bare floors, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, like it was waiting for something to happen. The silence in the place was overwhelming at times, a constant reminder of how alone I really was now. It wasn't the loneliness that bothered me so much, though. It was the questions that kept popping up, the little things I had to decide for myself that I hadn't had to think about in years. What should I buy for this place? What's enough and what's too much? What kind of bed should I get? How do you even furnish an apartment that's just yours? I spent days overthinking the smallest decisions. I'd stand in the middle of the living room, looking at the empty space, trying to picture what felt right. The couch. Did I want something that looked good for company or something that I could just sink into at the end of the day? The kitchen. Should I bother with anything fancy or just the essentials? It was all so new, and at the same time, it wasn't. I'd never really gotten the chance to think about what I liked, what I needed, what felt like me. For so long, I'd lived in the background of a life that wasn't really mine anymore. Now, I had to figure out what that even meant. The apartment started filling up slowly. I bought a small, worn leather chair from a secondhand shop and placed it next to the window. It felt good. The guitar I'd shoved in the back of a closet for years found a spot in the corner. The bookshelves that I'd never had room for before were now stacked with books I hadn't read in ages. I started cooking for myself. I hadn't cooked for anyone in years. In the beginning, it was simple. Just me and a skillet, maybe a piece of chicken, maybe some vegetables. But slowly, I started enjoying it. I'd try new recipes, things I remembered loving before everything felt like a routine. I'd take my time, even if I was just cooking for myself. I found I didn't mind eating alone. Not when I was enjoying the food I made, not when I had something to focus on that didn't involve pretending I was happy in a relationship that had been over for so long. I went back to the gym too, not just for the physical changes, though that came with time. I went because it was something I could control. It became part of my routine. I'd wake up early, go for a run, hit the weights. My body was sore in ways it hadn't been in years, but it felt like progress. I could feel the strength coming back, not just in my muscles, but in my mind too. And it wasn't just the gym. I started reading more, picking up books I'd put off for years: fiction, history, philosophy. I even started playing my guitar again. It was rusty at first, my fingers stumbling through chords that used to be second nature, but I kept at it. In the evenings, I'd sit on that worn leather chair, guitar in hand, letting the music fill the quiet of the apartment. It was the first time in so long that I felt like I was doing something for myself, something that didn't require approval or attention from anyone else. It wasn't perfect. I still had moments where I felt lost, where I'd catch myself thinking about the life I'd left behind, the mistakes I'd made, the things I couldn't take back. But those moments were fewer. They were smaller, and more importantly, they didn't control me anymore. The more time passed, the more I started to feel like I was coming back to myself. I wasn't the person I used to be, not exactly. But I was someone who was still learning, still growing. The man who walked into that apartment was different from the man who had walked out of my marriage. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I didn't need her to tell me I was enough. I didn't need anyone to tell me anything. I was enough. I was finally enough for myself. 2 months after the divorce, I found myself at a friend's gathering, a low-key affair at Mark's place. It was the usual crowd, guys I hadn't seen in a while, a few of their partners, and a handful of people I didn't know. I was still getting used to the idea of being part of a social scene again, but tonight, it felt easy. I'd moved on from the heaviness of the past, and there was something freeing about it. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, chatting with Jeff, when I noticed her across the room, Sarah. She was standing by the door, laughing at something someone had said, her hair still the same color, her posture still stiff in the way I remembered. She hadn't changed, or at least, she didn't look any different on the surface. But there was something about the way she looked at me. It was subtle, but it was there, a shift in her gaze, a kind of recognition that wasn't there before. She looked like she wasn't sure what to do with herself, like she was trying to reconcile who I was now with who I used to be in her life. I didn't know how long I'd been staring until she made her way over to me. She was walking slowly, a little hesitant, but determined. She smiled when she reached me, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too light. It's good to see you." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "You too." She stood there for a moment, like she wasn't sure where to start. Finally, she went for the obvious. "So, how've you been?" It was a question I'd heard 1,000 times in the past couple of months, from friends, family, people who barely knew what happened. It felt a little strange now, asking and being asked, but I didn't mind it. I had the truth to give. "I'm good," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "Better than good, actually. I'm doing well, enjoying the freedom." She raised an eyebrow, like she wasn't sure what that meant. "Freedom?" "Yeah," I said, leaning back against the counter casually. "I'm not dragging myself through the motions anymore. I'm actually living my life, not stuck in something that doesn't fit." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't say anything. She looked down at the floor, then back up at me, like she was trying to find something in my face she could understand. "I've noticed," she said slowly, "that you seem different, like more confident. More yourself, I guess." I could see where this was going. The way she said it was almost an accusation, as if I was supposed to be apologetic for the changes she was noticing. But I didn't feel like explaining myself to her anymore. "I've always been this person," I said, keeping it simple, my voice calm. "You just never saw it." She took a step back, her expression unreadable. It was like I had caught her off guard, like the version of me she thought she knew wasn't the one standing in front of her now. "I didn't know you'd—" She stopped herself, unsure how to finish the sentence. She was clearly trying to find some way to connect with me, to justify whatever it was that had driven her to want to have this conversation in the first place. But I wasn't interested in going down that road. "I'm not who you think I am anymore," I said, the words coming out firm but without anger. "And I'm okay with that. I don't need you to understand or approve. I've moved on from all of it." Her mouth opened like she was going to say something else, but the words never came. She just stood there, caught between whatever version of herself she was holding on to and whatever version of me was standing in front of her now. The silence between us stretched longer than either of us had probably anticipated. I gave her one last look, then shook my head slightly, not out of frustration, but because I could finally see it clearly. There was nothing left to salvage. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," I said, my voice softer now. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked away. It wasn't about anger or bitterness. It was about understanding that we had both changed, probably in ways neither of us had anticipated, and that those changes couldn't be undone, not by a conversation, not by anything. As I made my way toward the door, I didn't feel anything other than quiet relief. I wasn't going back to that life, to that person. Not for anyone. Not for her.